Okay, you can make a shachianu. We got to the last part of our Mishnah. Ve'ein chodchen et הפתילה, Rabbi Yehuda Omer chodcha be'or. So the Mishnah says you cannot go ahead and you cannot cut the wick. You have one wick, you can't cut it into two. Rabbi Yehuda says that you can use fire. This was the last clause of our Mishnah, and the Gemara picks up with that. The very bottom of Lamed Bet Amud Aleph. Ve'ein chodchen et הפתילה l'shnayim. You can't go ahead and cut the wick into two. Ma'ishna bisakin. What's the difference? Why would Rabbi Yehuda say that you can use fire to do it, but you can't use a knife? The law, bisakin the law. Why not with a knife? The kemetaken mana, because you're going ahead and you're fixing it, making it into a now into two wicks, right? As Rashi says, the metaken mana achad hayta v'osel shnayim. You now made into two. So the Gemara immediately asks on that, or nami kametaken mana. When you go ahead and you use a fire, so you're also making two wicks, right? What's the difference? So the Gemara answers, Tani Rabbi Chia chodcha be'or b'pi shtei nerot. We're not dealing with just taking using fire to break it, but we're dealing with you have this one wick, and you put it into two nerot, namely two oil jugs. Nerot being the oil, the containers that hold the oil, and then you light it with a flame in the middle, and then that breaks it into two. So that's what we're talking about. Why should that be permissible? So Rashi explained that pi shtei nerot, notein shnei rashaha betoch shtei nerot. You go ahead and you put it into two different oil containers. Im tzarich ladlikan ke'echad umadlik be'emsa delo muchach delitkune mana mechaven ela hadladlaka be'alma. So it doesn't look like if you're making it into two wicks. It looks like you're just lighting the flame. You're just lighting it because once it's in the oil, it's as if you're already lighting it. It's not recognizable. It's not noticeable that it's metaken mana, and therefore it is going to be permissible. 2 points on this. Rashi adds im tzarich lahadlikan. So some of the other Rishonim, the Rosh and others say, whoa, 1 second. Only if tzarich lahadlikan, and if you didn't need to light it, then it'd be a problem. What does im tzarich lahadlikan really play a role here? Why is that a factor? The other point, and this relates to what we spoke about last week a little bit, where Rashi at the end says, the lo muchach de lekune mana mechavein. It doesn't appear. It's not for sure. It doesn't appear that he's going ahead and doing it to go ahead and create the vessel of the wick. Because it just looks like he's lighting it. So this relates to last week, because we spoke about we asked the kasha on the Pnei Yeshua. Why the Pnei Yeshua asked a very good kasha. He asked a question on Rashi. Rashi on the Mishnah had brought ein osin pachamin. Why can't you make the coals? So Rashi said because these coals, you're osek kli, you're metaken mana. You're going ahead and making a kli because these coals are used by the blacksmiths. Okay, makes sense. And the problem is that the Pnei Yeshua points out is that the Gemara says nothing about that. The Gemara gives seemingly a completely different reason of why you can't go ahead and make these coals. The Gemara says, Pshita, of course you can't make these coals. L'may chazi, what can you use it for? And the Gemara explains that you would have thought that maybe you can go ahead and use it for the bathhouses at the time, the specific time in history where it was prohibited to go ahead and use it for bathing, but you could use it for as a sweating room or what's it called, a sauna or something like that. So you would have thought you could use it for that. Kamash malan that you can't. So why doesn't Rashi just say that? So the Pnei Yeshua explained that the real reason, even according to the Gemara, and that's what Rashi is saying on the Mishnah, the real reason for the Mishnah you can't make the coals is because of metaken mana of the blacksmiths. However, because of that, you can't even do it for other uses in which you're not really metaken mana, such as using it for the bathhouse. That's not really metaken mana. But the reason you can't do it for the bathhouse is because it's nira kimetakin mana. It looks like you're making it into a utensil. What utensil? That which the blacksmiths use, right? And that's how the Pnei Yeshua got out of the kasha of Rashi. So we asked on the Pnei Yeshua last week, and I think the Gemara that we're seeing now just reinforces that issue, is that metakin mana, the gzera of metakin mana, the gzera of nira kimetakin mana, usually doesn't apply when it doesn't look like metakin mana. The Gemara we brought, where it's most expresses itself, is a person going to the mikvah on Shabbat or Yom Tov, where it's not nira kimetakin mana. It doesn't look like he's going to the mikvah to purify himself. Nira kidemekar. It looks like he's going ahead just to cool off. And since it only looks like he's going to cool off in the water, so they allow it, as opposed to when you take a utensil and you stick it in the mikvah, so that you're clearly just doing it for purification reasons. So the Gemara here says the same thing. The reason that you're allowed to go ahead, according to Rabbi Yehuda, and light the wick in the middle while it's in the oil, even though you're splitting it into two, is because it doesn't look like you're going ahead and taking one wick and splitting it two. It looks like you're just lighting a lamp. And if it just looks like you're doing a normal activity, not mitakin mana, then it's going to be okay if it's not absolute mitakin mana.
Why is two wicks always considered better than one?
So a wick in general, since it has a use, a specific use, it's considered a kli. If I now have two instead of one, so I've created an extra kli.
Even though with one wick, it's a longer wick, it's going to last longer than a short wick. The two short wicks. Technically, there's, how have you added value to it?
True, you've diminished the one kli that you've had by shortening its lifespan, but nonetheless, you still have created a new entity. And I think that's the issue here.
You can light two candles at once. What do you mean? How did you increase it? You could take the second wick and put it in another room and light another candle. Now you have two lights instead of one.
Yeah, but it lasts for a shorter period of time.
Okay, but you still have
fundamentally
two instead of one.
Fundamentally, as a scientist, you should know you haven't really done anything to add value to it. It's the same.
Well, if you have two rooms that are dark and you can only light them in one, and you only want it for 15 minutes, then you have added value because now you can do it in two.
So your assumption is you only want it for 15 minutes.
Oh, well, who says 15 minutes? Maybe you've diminished it from 3 hours to 2 hours. I don't know.
No, I hear what you're saying, that you're diminishing the value of one of the kelim, but in terms of mitakin mana, the creation of a new one, that's enough to make a problem. In terms of your cost benefit analysis, it might not be a smart idea to do it. Nonetheless, it'll still be a problem of mitakin mana.
Okay.
Okay, so that's one issue. Gemara goes on. Amar Rav Natan bar Abba, Amar Rav, Mochatin et Aptila b'Yom Tov. Rav Natan goes ahead and he says that you're allowed to go ahead and mochatin at the wick. What is mochatin? So the Gemara wants to know that. My mochatin. What is mochatin? Amar Chananya bar Shlama mishmei Darav, or not mishmei Darav. La'aduye choshka. What does that mean? La'aduye, Rashi explains, lahasir choshka pacham hamachshich ora. So you go ahead and you have on the top of the wick, sometimes it can form a little black coal. So to go ahead and remove it, that is what mochatin, the patila, means. Okay, we are going to return to that. That's going to be more or less the topic of our shiur tonight. I just wanted to, there's some agadata. I wanted to get to the Mishnah. So let's do that, and then we're going to come back. Okay, and here's the agadata. Tana bar Kafra. Shisha dvarim nemru b'ptila. Gimel lahachmer v'gimel lahakel. So 6 things were said about the wick. 3 of them were stringency, and 3 of them were a leniency. Now pay attention here. It's interesting that the 3 and 3, I think, actually corresponds. Each one corresponds to the other. In godlin ota l'chadchila, you can't go ahead and what's the English word for that?
Fabricate a wick?
Like twist it together to create the wick. There's a word for that.
To braid it.
To braid it? All right. I'll I'll settle with that. You can't go ahead and braid the wick together. On Yom Tov, ve'ein mehavavin otab, or you can't go ahead and pre-light it and then blow it out in order that it should go ahead and light. And then you go ahead and when you need it, it'll light faster. Many in Europe, there was the minhag for the husband to go ahead and on Erev Shabbat to light the candles for the wife and then to blow it out. So then when she lights it, it lights right away. That was his way of going ahead and taking part in the mitzvah. Some people are still knowing that. That's where it comes from. Mahavin ota ba'or. So that's number 2. Ve'ein chodchen ota l'shnaim. You can't go ahead and cut it into 2. So those are the lahachmer. What's lahakel? Ma'akeh biyad. You can go ahead and just ma'akeh biyad is just kind of like push it together, right? Right? You can, if you have like the extra strands that are coming out, you're not creating the wick, but you're just like reinforcing it with your hands. Vishora b'shemen, to go ahead and soak it in oil. V'chotcha be'or b'pishtei nerot, and go ahead and to cut it into 2 using this with the fire, using these 2 oil utensils. So why do I say that they're parallel? Because you can't go ahead and create it, braid it from scratch, but you can reinforce it and just put the fibers back together. You can't go ahead and mahavavin, you can't go ahead and light it to make it that it'll light faster when you actually need it, but you can soak it in oil that it'll light faster, or it'll light faster and better when you need it. And you can't cut it with a knife, but you can go ahead and cut it with a fire if it's in 2 oil containers. Okay. So Amar Rav Natan bar Abba, Amar Rav Atiri. So we are going on this is all Rav Natan, right? This is all Rav Natan bar Abba. We're just going on a Rav Natan bar Abba rampage here. Atire Bavel, Yorde Gehenim. The rich people of Bavel, so they have VIP status in Gehenim. Ki had Shabtai bar Marinus, this man named Shabtai bar Marinus, Ikla le Bavel, he came to Bavel, Boimine Iska, and he asked for them Iska. What's Iska? So Rashi here explains Iska, Schora, Lisaker Machasid Schar. So what do you want to do? He wanted to go ahead and take their merchandise and then take it into the market for them, so to speak, be their distributors, and to make a profit off of that and kind of split the earnings for them. That's what he wanted to do for them. And what did they say? V'lo yahavu lei, and they didn't give it to him. Mizone, mizaminami lo zinuhu. He asked for food. If they weren't going to help him get a job, so they asked for food. And they said no. Mizone sha'al mehem mizono. Rashi explains they asked for them for food. Mizanami lo zinu. They didn't give him any food. So Amar Hani me'erev Rav. These people, he said, they're from the Erev Rav that joined when we left Egypt. As it says, V'natan l'cha rachamim v'rachamecha. I don't think I'm pronouncing that right here. The whole pasuk is V'natan lecha rachamim v'rachamecha v'rabacha kasher nishbata lavotecha. All right, so Hashem says that you're going to be merciful. Kol marachim ala briot biyadua shu mizaro shel Avram Avinu. V'kol she'enu marachim ala briot biyadua she'enu mizaro shel Avram Avinu. Anybody who goes ahead and is a merciful person, so we know that he is from the seed of Avram Avinu, and anyone who's not, so we know he's not from the seed of Avram Avinu. Rav Natan bar Abba, another statement of Rav Natan bar Abba. Amar Rav, Kol ha'mitzapeh al shulchan acherim, olam choshech ba'ado. Anybody who goes ahead and is relying on somebody else's table, namely is looking to be supported by somebody else, so the world to him is dark. Shene'amar, the pasuk says in Iyov, Nodehu lalachem ayeh yada ki navon biyado yom choshech. So anybody who went ahead, anybody who is who's wandering from bread. He doesn't have bread, and he says, where is it? So he knows that the day is choshech. So right, and that's somebody who is mitzapeh on shulchan acherim.
Isn't that more like a klala than it is otherwise? In other words, you're not supposed to always rely on the shulchan of others.
Right, and therefore anybody anybody who's in that situation is basically is an expression of that klala.
You're never going to get out of it, I think, is what it's saying. You're never going to get out of that situation.
Right. I mean, you can. What does it mean? Yom Chashulcha. It's like it's dark for him. It could be that he doesn't see a way out of it. Now it's interesting that these two agadic statements by Rav Natan, they kind of complement each other in a certain way. Right. On the one hand, he's saying it's a criticism towards the Atirei Bava. They're the rich people who wouldn't want to go ahead and give and support somebody else. He's saying it's not right what you're doing. You should go ahead and support it. You're not a Rahma, you're not a Bnei Rachamim, you're not Zera Shalavim Avinu. That's not how it should be. So that's what he says to one person, and to the people on the other side, he's saying you should be mitzapeh al shulchan acherim. That's also not correct. I think the point here is that everybody needs to always be concerned about their obligations and not their rights. Okay. I had a situation, we were just speaking about Reishi before, so I actually had to leave my yeshiva 2 weeks early for my brother's wedding at the time. So I was like the only yeshiva guy who was back in his community before everyone came back from yeshiva. And I was at shul that Shabbat, and the Rav got up and he gave like a fiery musar shmuz to the entire community that when the yeshiva guys come back, you should lay off of them. You think they all flipped out and everything's wrong. Maybe they're serious about Judaism. And I was blown away. I was like, wow, look at this. He's giving such musar to everybody in the community. And then a week later, everybody came back from yeshiva, and he had a shmooze with everyone who came back to yeshiva, and he said the exact opposite to all the guys. He says, you guys got to calm down and, take it easy, be easy on your parents. So you got to know how to play both sides. I think that's exactly what Rav Natan is doing. He's giving musar to the Atirei Bava, and he's also giving musar to those who are mitzapeh al shulchan acherim. Okay. Rav Chisda Amar Av Chayav Eino Chayim. Rav Chisda adds that even their life is not alive. Tan Rabbanan. Gimel Chayim Einam Chayim. There are three people. Situations of their life is not a life. The Elohein, and these are they. Hamitzapeh al shulchan achaver, somebody who's always looking towards the table of his friend for sustenance. Umishi Ishto Moshelet Alav, somebody whose wife rules over him. And because this is going on YouTube later, I will not comment on that one. Umishi Asurin Moshlin Begufo, and somebody whose body is overtaken by affliction. Lo aleinu. The Yeshomrim Af Misha Ein Lo Ella Chaluk L'Charan. And those who say that somebody only has one garment. Why? What is one garment?
Doesn't have a suit for Shabbos.
Doesn't have a suit for Shabbos. No. He'll wear it inside out. He'll put on a tie.
He can't wash it, according to Rashi, right? Because he's got to wear it all the time.
Right, and therefore, so he doesn't wash it. I know many people don't wash their clothing in yeshiva. What's the?
Because it'll have lace in it. I mean, I'm cheating. I have my Gemara open. So he'll have possibility of having lice, and he can never clean his clothes properly.
Right, exactly. So that's what Rashi says. Ein yachol lechavso. The kinim mitzarinoto. That's what Rashi adds in the Gemara. It doesn't say anything about kinim. It just says he doesn't have a clothing. So you might think, what? So he doesn't get to change for Shabbat. He can't go on a date. Like, what's the problem? Rashi's saying, no. It's really well. Actually, the truth is from the continuation of the Gemara. It's clear that Rashi is correct. But it's the issue is that there are lice and fleas or whatever else it is, and it's causing him a tremendous amount of pain.
By the way, it's not clear in the halakha of wearing big day Shabbos whether it's sufficient to wash your clothes and wear them cleanly washed. I think you're supposed to have a set clothing for Shabbos.
Agreed. Ideally, the person should have, but to the extent we'd say if he doesn't have a clothing for Shabbat, so we say ein lo chayim. Absolutely, a person should for sure have a separate set of clothing for Shabbat, and even a separate set for Yom Tov. Something special even for Yom Tov. If it's a tie, an extra different kippah or something, even of a higher value or level on Yom Tov. So that's the Yesh Omrim. So the Gemara explains the Tanakama efshar d'mayim b'menaya. The Tanakama says that a person only has one chuluk. No, it's not the end of the world. We wouldn't go to the extent to say he doesn't have a life. Why? Because he can go ahead and he can check it for lice as he's wearing it. While he's just sitting there during mincha, just pick off the fleas and the lice, and he'll be okay. Okay, that brings to the Mishnah. What I wanted to discuss is this whole, with the time that we have, is Mochatin et Haptila. So the Gemara says that you are allowed to do this Mochatin. What is Mochatin? So we saw Rashi here, is that you're removing the black charcoal, the black coal from on top. Bonus points. Who knows where this appeared earlier in Beitza? I'll give you a hint. It's on Daf Chaf Bet Amud Aleph. All right, Chaf Bet Amud Aleph, the sugya appeared, but only in the Rishonim. The Gemara there said, kind of out of nowhere, it's also talking about fires and wicks and whatnot. In 4 words, Amarav, Kinba Shari. Kinba is allowed on Yom Tov. What is Kinba? So Rashi there said, Kinba, Limchot Rosh Haptila Shena'ase Pacham. Go ahead and remove the top of the wick that became charcoal. Shekorin Moker Belaz. Moker is Mochatin. So Rashi explains the Gemara on Chaf Bet of Kinba to be exactly what our Gemara here is saying. That it's just removing the charcoal top of the wick. Tosfot, other Rishonim jump on Rashi for this. Tosfot here says, Kin Bashari, Perish Rashi, Moker Balaz, Lamchot Rosh Haptila, Va'osa Pacham. Veloniira. What are you talking about, Rashi? It can't be. Why? Did the Kman, the Parak HaMevi, our Parak, what does it say on Lamed Bet? Korile Mochatin Ataner, my Mochatin, Aduya Choshka, Velo Kamar Hachika, Hi Lishna Dahatam. It's a different language. Different words are used. Mashma, that we're talking about a different activity altogether. It's not the same thing. So there's basically there are 2 activities that are going here with this wick. Echad b'shah shedolek v'hainu hu d'lekman v'yesh echad la'acha shekava shemtaknin ota kedei sheyadlik maher u'maser hapacham sheberosh haptila u'bakach nocha sheyadlik ota v'hainu ahu d'hacha d'shari. So Tosfos explains there are 2 activities. One is while it's lit, you're removing the top. And that is actually our case of Mochatin. Our Gemara of Mochatin is where while it's lit. And the other one in the Gemara in Chav Bet is after it is already extinguished, like Rashi explains, and you're just removing the charcoal so that it'll light better the next time. Is there any nafkamina? Meaning, Lamais, at the end of the day, do Rashi and Tosfos disagree on the actual halacha here, or is it just semantics of what you called it? Right? Tosfos says both are permissible. You can remove the top of the wick, whether it's the charcoal after it's extinguished, or even while it's lit, which is our Gemara. So, what do you guys think? We would have to say, well, what would be the Havamina to think either one would be prohibited? Right? That would be the question, because both the Gemara, Tosfos is saying they're both permissible. Rashi doesn't.
The one when it's lit might be more of a problem, no?
So right. So question is, according to Rashi, if you remove the top of the wick while it's lit, is that going to be a problem? Tosfos says it's okay. Rashi doesn't comment about that case. Rashi says both Gemaras are talking about the same case.
a little off topic, but just because I'm a little confused here. Don't we have elsewhere where a pacham is actually an improvement to a candle that you're allowed to extinguish to save the oil or for other purposes, but you can't extinguish the actual fire because it creates a pacham, which improves it?
Yeah, so absolutely. First of all, that's not off topic at all. This is, as we see from all of these Gemaras, anytime you talk about wicks, it's a free for all. You can say whatever you want about wicks. That seems to be the meaning of the Gemara. So I'm not an expert on wicks. I will say this: what it does seem from my life experience and from the Gemara, that there's a certain threshold. I think that if you have a wick that's brand new, if you use wicks for let's say Hanukkah, all right? If you use wicks and oil, so when you're lighting a wick for the first time, and in Kal V'chomer, when you're talking about their wicks, sometimes it doesn't light when it's fresh. But if you used yesterday's wick and you just pulled it up a little bit and it's already soaked in the oil and it's already black a little bit, sometimes it lights. At least in my experience, it could be that I just don't know how to use candles properly, but it lights a little better. But at a certain point, I think when it starts to like fold over on itself and just become like this ball of charcoal on top, so then that part doesn't even light and it just gets in the way of the actual fire. So there's a certain line that's crossed where it becomes no longer beneficial, but actually detrimental to the lighting process. Take it for what it's worth.
Well, when we prepare candles for our wives on Shabbos, one of it, sometimes you have to light the thing because it's a new wick, right?
Yeah. So my wife's grandmother, so her husband actually does that. She's from back, keeping the minhag back in the days. When we first got married, my wife was very excited about me taking upon that minhag. But a lot of kids makes Erev Shabbat a lot more complicated. But yeah, definitely. The question is, our candles, what they have the wax around it, does that really? Should do a science experiment and see how much that really helps. Have a contest. Put up 20 candles, those that have been pre-lit and those that haven't, and see how fast you can light them all.
So it's easy to see how Rashi could disagree with Tosfos. I mean, if you're taking off the charcoal while it's lit, did you run the risk that you're going to snuff it out?
Oh, okay. So one issue is you might say mechaber, right? Well, if the issue is mechaber, I can't do it. If it's not lit, it's just charcoal. So then all you're talking about is mitaken mana, right? And then you can say it's not mitaken mana or it is mitaken mana. If it's lit, so you have the additional issue of mechaber, orange, right? Maybe it's also mitaken mana if we deal with that, but you also have the issue of mechaber. Now we have to go back to last week. Is that an issue according to Rashi? Last week we explored a machloket between Rashi and the Beit Midrash of the Ramban, of the Rif and the Ran. Is mechabe mutter on Yom Tov l'tzorech, and the Ran said no, and Rashi seemed to leave it out of the sugya. And based on the Gemara in Shabbat in Kuf Lamed Daled, we showed that Rashi really holds that mechabe is permissible. It's one of the malachot that are permissible on Yom Tov when it's a case of EF from Erev Yom Tov. So going that route of mechabe won't be. You could say it in general, but I don't know if it's going to help for Rashi. Because for L'chora, according to Rashi, mechabe is going to be permissible. Okay, well, let's put that on the back burner. No pun intended. And let's explore some other aspects of this. The Rambam, when he brings this down, so he says as such: "Ein misalkin et pi aner lamala kedei shetachbe, ve'ein masirin et hashemen mimena." You can't go ahead. I'm not exactly sure what that's talking about. I'm not sure what misalkin et pioneer is, but the ein masir at Hashem and you can't go take out oil from the lamp. So it'll go out. The ein chotchen et rosh haptila b'kli. You can't go ahead and cut the top of the wick with a kli. That's seemingly how the Rambam was understanding our case. Aval nofetz et rosha biyadav. But you can go ahead and you can use your hand to go ahead and take off the top. Says the Ravid, on Aval Nofet et Rosh Biyada, Amar Avram, Vafilu v'machad shari, Amru Beitza lamed bet, Mוחטין. The Ravid first makes an assumption that the Ravid says, he's quoting our Gemara, he says that if you to go ahead and take off the top of the wick, so why is the Rambam saying you can do it with your hand, the charcoal wick with your hand? Mashma that if you want to do it with a kli, that's not allowed. Why? You want to go ahead and do it with a kli, it's totally fine. It says Mוחטין. Mוחטין means altogether. And the Gemara makes no distinction. So the way the Ravid sets it up, he sets it up as a machloket between him and the Rambam, whether to remove this charcoal part of the top is permissible or not with a kli. Everyone agrees without a kli, it's okay. Question is with a kli. That's number one. Number two is the ein chotech et rosh haptila b'kli. You can't go ahead and remove the top of the wick with a kli. What's that talking about? Is that the same case? Seemingly not. All right, what's the difference between chotech et rosh haptila and nofet et rosha? Not so clear in the Rambam.
Mhm.
Okay, we'll add that to our pot in the back burner and try to make sense of this. So the Rosh brings it down. He brings down the Gemara. He brings down the Rambam. Of course, the Rambam here. Sorry, we're just short on time here. But Oser la'asiro b'kli. So the way that the Rosh as well understands the Rambam is that you're not allowed to do with the kli. He doesn't understand exactly why. He says ve'efshar dachashav le tikun kli shu mitaking neptila. He thinks that maybe if you're using a kli, so according to the Rambam, then it's mitaking kli. But if it's not with a kli, then it's not. Lo mistabra, he doesn't understand why. The ein kan tikun kli. There's no tikun kli here if you're using it with the kli. What's the problem? The Gemara says it's mutar. The gam the kamar Mוחטין stam mashma b'chol inyan mutar. The Gemara makes no distinction. It says Mוחטין. Mוחטין means Mוחטין.
Isn't in the flow of the Rambam seem to be ve'ein chotech et rosh haptila b'kli, that is some kind of mechaber? I mean, the other is ein mechaber kadei shetechaber. Ve'ein nasir neshem shemen mimena, that I think also is mechaber. Ve'ein chotech et rosh haptila b'kli, it seems to be the same halacha that has to do with mechaber.
Right. So I agree with you. I do agree with you. And I also think that maybe that's perhaps why the Rambam says with a kli for that part and nofet et rosha biyado. But meaning, if the fire is lit, you're not going to be using your hand. You're going to be using a kli because it's lit, right? So the reason perhaps that the Rambam says kli here is just because that's how you would do it. You wouldn't use your hand. All right, and the reason that he says biyado for nofet et rosha is because when it's extinguished, the way that you would do it is just with your hand. It's, you just flick it off. So the fact that the Ravid makes a big deal, the Rambam says biyado is mutar, mashma with the kli is asar, maybe lav dafka. Maybe the Rambam is just talking about the normal way that people would do it. But in Achanami, if you wanted to use a kli to take off the rosh, nofet et rosha, that'd be permissible. And if you wanted to go ahead and use your hand to take off the top of the wick while it was on fire, not advised, but it would also be prohibited. All right, like Sam is saying, the question is it lit or is it not lit?
Based on the Ravid, it sounds like Sam's looking at the beginning part, which obviously it's something that's lit. The Masirin may be to make it go out quicker. But based on the question that Ravid has on the Rambam, it's talking about one that's already extinguished. Because our case in our Gemara is an extinguished.
Our case in our Gemara is extinguished only according
The case of Mוחטין is with
only according to Rashi. Rambam understands. Tosfot understands.
Understands both. Yeah.
Now the Rambam was like, "Oh, I'll have fun with everybody who's going to read my book. I will just put this case of chotech et rosh between a case of something where it's clearly lit and something where it's clearly extinguished, and I'll let the people, figure it out themselves. So I don't think it's clear at all from the Rambam. I think it's kind of either way, right? And part of it would depend on, well, what's the problem of cutting it or removing the top while it's lit? Is the only issue that we can think of mechabe, or perhaps is there a more of an issue of metakin mana when it's lit for possible reasons? Okay, so let's see. In 3 minutes we have. Okay, we could do this. Shulchan Aruch brings it down. Mutar lechtoch rosh haptila kadei sheyeh noach sheyadlik. Okay, that's in Sif Dalet, and Sif Yod. He says, "Aval ina chotech roshav b'ptila b'kli," but you can't go ahead here. Mutar, this is how the Shulchan Aruch Beis Yosef understood. Mutar pacham sheberosh haner kishu dolek. Aval ina chotech roshav b'ptila b'kli. So he thinks that when it's lit, you can remove the top, but you just can't use a kli. The mechabit part is not the issue. The mechabit part is not the issue. Someone on the daf here says that because, I think it's the Beis Yosef. The Beis Yosef says, when we read inside, the Beis Yosef says that it's not an issue because the reason that you're mechabe is in order that the light should light better. That piece of black charcoal on the top of the candle is interfering. So by you removing it, it's enhancing the actual light, and therefore it's going to be permissible. So I just want to read the last two lines of the Beis Yosef and the Taz here. Beis Yosef says, the way that he understands the Rambam, or Mibnei, we'll read this line. To actually remove some of the wick, since you normally do it with a kli, because you actually have to remove some of the wick, that's going to be metakin mana. It's actually two different parts of the wick. To be either removing the black part, which is, you can just flick it off, or some of the actual wick, which is normally done with a kli because it's harder to remove. You need scissors or something to actually break it. The way that the Beis Yosef understands it is that it has nothing to do with mechabe. The issue is if you're removing just the black coal, it's not even really attached. You're just removing something amoneh. You're moving something that's interfering, as opposed to if I'm moving some of the wick. So then it's a whole different activity. I'm actually doing something to the wick itself, and it's normally done with a kli. So that's metakin mana.
And if you do it by hand?
If you do it by hand, then it would be b'shinoi. It would be b'shinoi, and maybe lo nirik metaken, and some might be permissible. It seems to be permissible according to the Beis Yosef, even if it was lit. Right?
Yeah, you do it quickly with your hand. You wet hands a little bit or something like that. You can do it.
If it's to remove the black part, so you can do that. But to actually rip off some of the wick with your hand while it's lit, even if it's not lit, it's going to be difficult. But especially if it's lit, I don't know how possible that would be. Here, Taz explains like this: to remove the black part, that's what's fine. There's no fixing it. It's just removing something that's destructive to the actual light. It's just like you have the wick and something external is attached to it. It's not even lit, it's just in the way. You're going ahead and removing part of the wick. That is a problem because it's part of the actual wick. That's metakin the actual wick. It's just not lighting that well, and that's why you want to go ahead and remove it. Bringing that back, and we'll end with this, bringing that back to Rashi and Tosfot, perhaps that's why Rashi does not explain the Gemara, our Gemara, as it being lit, because he doesn't want to get it. If it's talking about removing some of the actual wick, that might be a problem. You have to get into it. We're talking about the actual black part, which is the charcoal. You're talking about part of the wick.
I gotta go.
Yeah, more on that. All right. Everyone should have a wonderful evening, and no more tzarot. Shabbat shalom.